these are all coming through from the British Standard, the PAS 1192 Part 6. Now, most of these aren't relevant to the golden thread. So what we've done is identified a number of additional attributes. Well, I've not done this. This has been done by people like Nick Nisbet. So we've got here structural risks and also specific fire risks. So the intention of this is being fed back into back up into MBS, and the intention with this is to actually have a classification method that we can use, and therefore, if we can, say there failure to get people out risk management or failure to protect the fire, those are obviously things that we're managing in our collaborative effort, and if we can identify maybe even solutions to those, then we can map the two things together. So that's principally what I wanted to cover on that. So should we go
okay, well, in terms of methodology, what we're going to do, we've had a great number of responses back for the 5 questions George and just sent out. We've put those all together. What we do is we'll go through each question one by one, focusing on answering the questions. From experience over the last few days with these meetings, if we can focus on getting the questions answered and then sort of like have a chat about them at the end of that each questions session, if that makes sense. So just, do you want to put up the first question? This hasn't always gone very well, so we'll see how the technology works today. And there you go. Excellent. Now, that will also be shared on the chat because there are quite a number of answers. If you scan down, Jess.
Could I just say, Richard, what we've done here is we've taken the inputs that you guys have given us and we've tried to consolidate them into a single list, deduping where possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll probably, if you'd be better off actually having a look at those, maybe taking a couple of minutes to look through those on the chat. And then once that's done, I'm going to be asking individuals for their input, anything they think that's glaringly missing. And then what we'll do is anybody who's got something to add, we'll add it in the chat, and then just we'll copy and paste it into the document. So it's live and dynamic.
And in the team, and I'm going to pick Steve because he's a mate, and it's good to embarrass a friend at times. If you've not had a chance to actually contribute something yet, anybody that's not yet had a chance to contribute, if you're able to speak up. So if Steve, you can think of any risks that you're aware of that an AOV is there to protect against, that would be helpful. And the same with the other questions.
And if you can't think of anything, we're going to ask you anyway.
I mean, in principle, from what I've seen here, it's relatively straightforward to say, in principle, what an AOV is designed to protect against. You know, it's the impact of smoke impacting on escape, etc. But the other thing I wondered if we could try and pick up here, are there risks that in a practical sense, from your experience, you've come across that have resulted from an AOV not working?
Has everybody had a chance to flick through that? Has anybody not really had a chance? Can I assume that everybody's done that? Okay, then following on from George's lead, I'm going to ask Steve if there's anything glaringly missing from that list that you can think of, Steve.
You're on mute, Steve.
No, normally you only have to press the space bar, but that wasn't particularly working on here, but hey ho. I think I've had a look through some of these, and it's really that the AOVs kind of work in utopia, but there's so many different scenarios where they can be overloaded. And one of those that we've come across recently in domestic properties is furniture that's stored that shouldn't be stored within escape routes, but is being stored within escape routes. Now, one of the ones that we find didn't even have a fire rating. So the amount of smoke that would produce would completely overload the AOV if there was a fire in that area. So it's okay fitting an AOV, and as long as everything else is compliant, and as long as everything else remains compliant. Now, the particular one that we did hadn't had a fire review for 2 years. And that sofa, or the furniture that was in there, had actually been in there for 18 months. If they had had a fire at that stage, that AOV would have been completely overloaded, and therefore, so I think there's other issues. It's okay, the AOV and it being fitted in compliance with how it should, but what are the circumstances is that not going to be operational? And I don't think they're always taken into consideration.
So we're talking about the other assets, would you call it, within the immediate environment and their impact on the AOV's performance.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily an asset. It can be where there's things have been put into that the
objects.
Say on this case, it was furniture that had been put underneath the staircase of the main fire exit, the main fire stairwell. Now that's. If you're looking at that, the fire risk assessment would say that shouldn't be stored there. The fire risk assessment is not linking that to the AOV, and it should be. The fire risk assessment should take that into account, that yes, the issue you're going to have with risk is smoke within the escape routes. The other risk of that is that smoke is not going to be extracted through an AOV, and therefore the two are inextricably linked, really.
Right, Steve. So how would we phrase that? The risk of what? The risk of in the immediate environment, new additions of something. How would we put that for our list?
Whilst you're thinking about that, Steve, because you can put that in, Ed or Suzanne, for example, or Pauline, have you got? What do you think about that?
Yes, sorry, Steve, if you could do me a favour, if you could actually answer that question and type it into the chat.
Yeah, will do.
And then just move it straight over. Sorry, George.
Yeah, I just wondered if anybody else has got any similar examples of specific circumstances which would impact on risks that would impact on an AOV performing. I think that's a really good example.
I think a few things we commonly see is the actuators not fixed particularly well to openers. Openers that strike elements of the building as it opens, so they don't actually open to an effective clear area. Along with this issue of combustible items being left in essentially area which should be sterile in a residential setting. So there's that issue. I suppose there's also a confusion over terminology. We use the term AOV when what we're talking about is a smoke control system, and the AOV is one component of it. So we just need to be clear, are we talking about the component, or are we talking about the system in its entirety, the cables, the control equipment, the activation equipment? So we need to be very clear about these definitions, because it leads to confusion, because you end up then with maintenance teams saying, oh, we've got an AOV, system, and we've got a fire alarm in there. Actually, it's all part of the same system. It's the activation system for the AOV.
I would say that we need both. So we need to absolutely understand how it's going to function as a system, but we also need to have the detailed components, that's the point that you've raised it as well.
Yeah, and bear in mind an AOV could be a set of components itself. So it's an actuator and a window, for instance, or it could be some louvered vents and an actuator. So there's lots of different permutations on just the AOV component.
Yeah, I think that's Edward. Could you put that in the chat for me?
Sure, yeah, I'll do my best.
I know, they're not a tough one. Stuart.
Yeah, just in my experience with an AOV that we had opened, and it was when it was an extremely windy day, actually caused a pressure differential issue within the lobby area where the vent was, causing the doors to not almost be unopenable because of the pressure issue. It created like a really high pressured environment, so you couldn't physically pull the door towards you almost unless you were very, very strong. So it's a bit of a tenuous one, but it is something that has to be considered, that sometimes an AOV might need to be shut to at least allow people to escape, even if it's not a tenable escape route.
Will?
Going back to the point Edward made, absolutely 100% agree. So for those of you involved in the HADG working group, that's what myself, Leona, are working with George and the team there to actually bring bring those clear definitions together. So as an industry, we're all working on the same, because there's the industry terminology. So in terms of testing products, AOV actually isn't recognised. It's what's called a natural smoke and heat exhaust ventilator, an NSHEV. So that's what you actually get your C mark or your UKCA mark against, and that doesn't kind of even recognise AOV. But Edward makes absolutely the right point. That's only one component of a bigger system, so we do need to agree on what those definitions are. So in terms of an action, then that's something I'm myself and Leona are working with George to provide that explanation, not just the definitions, but actually the terminology that's commonly out there, and kind of translating that through to what the product certification standards are.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to explain a little bit about what that work is, because we'd like to get also contribution from the rest of the team on that as well, Will, building on what you and Leona are doing. I'd just like to mention something that Pauline, she's keeping quiet, but one thing that Pauline told us on the Golden Thread Initiative project was that AOVs were being blocked from being opening properly because of scaffolding. You want to just explain that, Pauline? You look as though I think Pauline's frozen.
It's frozen, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll explain it briefly. Basically, what she was saying was that they had some work done externally, and the people that were doing the work put scaffolding up on the externals of the building, and therefore the AOV couldn't open. So that was a circumstance that probably should have been part of a method statement that identified that to those people. And the other contribution that I had last week was one of the other experts said that he's come across where an AOV didn't open when it was supposed to, and they discovered it was because people had been smoking inside the corridor, and they'd been pushing the window back, thinking it was just a window, and by doing that, they actually damaged the actuator, so it didn't work. So that comes back to, I think both Edward and Suzanne have said, I think it was you, said it's important that everybody understands why the AOV is there and include the tenants in that, so that they can understand if they damage something like that without realising it, they, that could contribute to a problem.
Stuart, your hands, is that up from before, or are you up, or is your hand up again?
Sorry, legacy on that. I'll take it off.
Okay, Edward.
I was just going to say I've had similar experiences with scaffolds blocking smoke ventilation on tower blocks, and at the same time blocking the dry riser inlet. So that is a genuine issue that comes up.
Keith, we haven't heard from you. Have you got anything to say on this?
Well, it's a big topic. So some of the common issues I think have already been raised by others, but there's probably a bigger issue in terms of the actual sort of design of these systems, and we should remember that a lot of people are putting in AOVs that are not performance-based solutions. They are just literally taken straight from ADB, and therefore they will suffer with things like wind. It won't necessarily be any guarantee of performance, but putting in a 1.5 square meter vent, depending on the fire size and the situation. So I think probably, and I did feed that back in writing, that the sort of arbitrary nature of the design of AOVs can in itself be problematic sometimes, depending on what the fire is that it's trying to protect against.
So you've raised again almost atmospheric conditions, weather conditions. Have we got that down? Weather, is it weather? Would you call it weather's impact of weather?
You could wind forces, which relate to topography of buildings. So where you have taller buildings that are taller than the buildings around them, they'll suffer particularly depending on the wind.
Could you put that in the chat for me, Keith, so that
Sure.
that just can copy that over? Has anybody else got anything glaring they think that we're missing on this one? I'll take that as a no. Suzanne's not talking because she's busy typing in loads of things.
I am. I got.
No, that's great. We're happy with that, Suzanne.
I don't know if you can hear me. I've got really bad sound again today, so I've been typing as opposed to talking. But I think one thing we don't do is we don't, and I've just put it into the chat saying that, we have these openable windows or ventilation that's very key in the fire strategy design of the building. And then we don't make it clear to residents or to anybody who key stakeholders who come in the building what the purpose of those are. And maybe there's a whole suite of signage that needs to be designed around that. That a sign, a sticky sign can be put on the window or put next to the vent that says this is a vent for, life safety or for fire. Do not tamper or something. That we make it a bit clear. Maybe that would be helpful. I mean, I'm not one for lots of signage. So many times in the past, I've seen fire extinguishers with 60 million signs telling you how to operate the fire extinguisher. I think you don't want to be too confusing, but we've never highlighted ventilation in a building, and it's such a key component of the life safety, the means of escape, and firefighting purposes.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think you've put that in the chat. Yes, Suzanne. Excellent. Edward.
Yeah, just a couple more things that popped into mind. Was one, by opening an AOV vent, you can create a situation with fall from height. So we need to be considering safety considerations in that respect. So it was that part K of approved documents, if I remember rightly. I know there are other approved documents apart from B. And also roof hatches or the roof vents being used also as maintenance access. So they get more use than they should do and are often left broken. So your AOV at the top of a stairwell or the top corridor is being used to access for cleaning purposes.
Inappropriately, basically.
So there's those issues.
Well, it's probably not inappropriate, Richard. It's that it's got a dual function, and therefore,
okay.
Yeah, it's probably got a dual function. Am I right on that, Edward?
Well, yeah. I suppose the question is, should they have, or should we say it's only for the function of venting and smoke. And if you want to get on the roof, create a separate hatch.
Right.
That'd be my preference.
Could you again? You know what I'm going to say, don't you?
Yeah, I know. I should have typed it first.
No, not at all. No, not at all. Well,
I can a quick answer to that. Again, it brings it back to the product testing that's recognised in the suite of product tests. If it's smoke only, it has a reliability classification of 1050. If it's dual purpose, so it's used for environmental ventilation or access, then it would need a reliability class of 10,000, which is part of the essential characteristics. So that's, but Edward, you're absolutely right to raise it, because this comes all the way back to the correctly specified product in the first instance. So yes, absolutely good point.
And Will, it's not just about its original specification. Information was carried through to the people that are doing the maintenance, so that if it needs to be replaced or repaired, then you've actually got that information, because we're obviously putting these together. So these buildings are hopefully going to last 50, maybe 100 years. So you've got to look at the whole life cycle, haven't you?
Absolutely, which is kind of I know we'll touch on that in question 5. Well, hopefully we'll touch on that in question 5.
Cool. Okay.
We will, trust me. Trust me, we're going to get there. Okay, so does anybody else have anything they want to add into this question 1? I'm assuming that's a no. So are we happy with the answers to question 1, that we've nailed it as far as is possible? Does anybody not think we've nailed it as far as possible? Wendy.
Hi. Just listening to everything, the one thing I haven't heard mentioned was the impact of issues with smoke detectors. Because AOVs can be triggered with smoke detectors, I know that through talking to other people within the fire industry, human intervention again can cause issues. So if somebody does mess with a smoke detector, or one example I was given is they actually hooked up a new smoke detector, but the placement was incorrect. So the AOV would either open too early or too late.
So issues with adjacent systems?
Yeah. Again, I guess it's about competency of training. I don't know if it comes under that heading, but it is a risk.
It seems a risk to me, Lindsay.
Sorry?
It seems a risk to me.
Yeah. And adding to that, somebody was, sorry, can't keep up with the notes going on here, who was talking about the topography and the effect of the forces. The other thing that comes into play here is that when new buildings are built, is there anything in place that ensures that the surrounding buildings are not impacted? Because that will change the wind forces around each and every building. I thought that would be a tricky one.
I think the short answer to your question is the last part of your point is no, because if you use approved document B and you just follow the guidance verbatim, there would be no requirement to consider surrounding buildings other than for B4, as in fire spread between buildings. So it's, you know, people who understand them would probably consider these points, and in reality would probably end up recommending a smoke shaft with AOVs rather than a simple AOV at the side of the building.
But there isn't actually anything in legislation or in any of the other documents that actually requires testing to be done on the effect to the surrounding buildings?
No, nothing in the statutory guidance to my knowledge about that. Although it would depend on the competence of the people involved in the design work, because people who were aware of it would obviously consider it, but people like architects who might just follow the approved documents, it probably wouldn't occur to them.
All right, Wendy, do you want to put those points into the chat so just can copy them over?
Yep, sure.
Excellent.
Just it's just occurred to me that there's quite a lot of work that I'm aware of where people are adding stories to existing buildings. There's a lot of development where that's happening, I understand. So therefore, the circumstances could be changing on the adjoining buildings that weren't there when the building was originally designed. So that's something that, you know, I think Moenzi's made a good point there. I don't know, is that something that I think we perhaps need it as a prompt, don't we? If developments are taking place in adjacent buildings, what's the impact on the the AOVs?
Okay, you've got that, Moenzi, yeah?
Good.
Okay, so I'm going to wind up question 1, unless I've got any objections. I haven't got any objections, so I'm going to wind up question 1. Just, you want to scroll down to question 2?
Yeah, so this one is about what information do we need? And we've had some great input from there. What I thought would be useful is also just to explain what we're doing already on the information bit of AOVs and the other asset types, and just to put that in some sort of context. I think there's sometimes a thought that this information is going to be available in the BIM models. Yeah. So I thought what would be useful, I prepared this last week for the fire door one, but it's not a bad example. IFC, for those that don't know, is the international standard for the data in BIM models. And you'll see here that we've got probably almost 100 attributes that collective teams have decided are important about a door. And some of those elements are highlighted here in what's called CODI, which is, if you like, the very basic information that you would have if you're handing over to the asset team. But all of the other elements here are things that somebody in the team has asked for. And the principle here is that all of these have got somebody wanting this information. So we don't need to worry about whether we're gathering too much information, because quite frankly, all that we do is switch off the information that you don't need. So if, for example, you're bothered about compliance, it might be just those 5 attributes of the door that you're bothered about. Or if you're bothered about the fire side of things, it might be the fire rating, or the whole range of new things that have come through from BS 8644. So the reason I'm just mentioning that is that's something that we don't need to worry about getting too much information, because each of you, if you only want to know a certain part, you only need to see what you need to see. So this is, if you ask just for standard CODI, you won't get information about fire rating, acoustic rating, or smoke stop, because these are all attributes that you need to require and request. And finally, this is the thing that Will was just talking about earlier, which is the work that we're doing with HAC, the Housing and Association Data Standards Group. And what we're doing here is trying to create data templates, standardized data templates, for all of the products and materials that are going in your buildings. And therefore, we can then feed that information through into asset management systems. And the way in which we're doing that, this is what we showed yesterday, which is, this is for a cavity barrier. And you'll see here that the cavity barrier is actually made up of, in this particular case, 16 or 17 different items. And then we've then got what are called the essential characteristics, which Will is a champion of in our little community. So these are the things that come from the Declaration of Performance. But here we've got, these are the this is from MBS. So these are the parameters that come from MBS in their data template, the majority of which are standard COBie. And here we've got information from, well, sorry, I'm just finally going to show, this is, I've tried to do the same today for an automatic opening vent. But of course, there is no data template for an automatic opening vent. It's a bit similar to a cavity barrier. It's an assembly of different things. So what we've done, we've said, okay, it's a window or a door, but it's got an actuator on it. And these are the definitions for, this is MBS. Here we've got the attributes for an actuator. And here we've got them from the Declaration of Performance. So the long and short of it is that what we could do with after this, we're going to be hopefully recruiting some of you to, which several people on this group have volunteered to do it for cavity barriers from yesterday. So we're going to be asking you to build on what Will and Leona are doing at the moment. They're coming at it from the manufacturer's perspective, and they're also installers and maintainers. But you, as maybe building safety people or asset managers or fire safety people, you would probably have your own views. Okay.
Is your hand up from before, or is it new?
I think that's from before, Richard, doesn't it? Doesn't
Okay,
it?
no
What
worries.
do I take it off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Oh, no.
Okay. So.
Right. So let's get on to question 2. Just there, if you can put that up again. That will also be on the chat, because I think there are a number of answers to this, so you might want a couple of minutes to read through it. Do you want to just scroll down a bit, and let's just see what's there.
I thought this was interesting. Sorry, that one there that I'll shut up for a minute, let you read.
Yeah, let's just give a couple of minutes and let everybody go through it first. Is that, are we kind of there? Is anybody not finished? Right, I'm going to assume everybody's kind of done enough. George, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say that list there, the one that's directly in front of us, that came from Pauline from L&Q. And what it really has jumped out at me on that is activation history. And I thought that was a really useful thing. I'd not thought of that. And that's obviously the value of this. So that's very much recording. Presumably that means it's recording when it's been activated, I presume, is it?
Yeah, that's what it is to show, yeah, all previous activations.
Yeah, very good point.
And the other thing with this, I think when we're looking, somebody else mentioned in one of their bits about product lifespan, and I thought that was interesting because in many cases the product lifespan would not be measured for something like an actuator on its 5 years or 10 years. I mean, it might be, that might be its warranty, but I've noticed, well, you would know better than me on this, but it's perhaps the number of actions that it needs to take. It might be that it's it's tested to work 10,000 times or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, it comes exactly back to that point that that Edward was making earlier. If it's got a reliability classification of 1,050, I won't go into detail why it's that, but 1,050, that assumes it's going to be tested once a month, 12 times a year, roll it over the life of the building. That kind of gives you what you're there. If it's going to be used for day-to-day access onto the roof, then that's why you suddenly move up to the 10,000 cycles. So yes, it's important, going back to the activation history or the event log of understanding how many operations it's actually performed. Because if it's got a reliability class of 1,050, but actually it's being used for day-to-day ventilation to stop overheating, well, it's going to massively shorten the life of the typically not the hinges of the window or the vent or the louver, but it potentially will shorten the life of the actuator. Therefore, there's a replacement needed. Therefore, the actuator that needs to be replaced to maintain the product compliance needs to be a compatible product that doesn't create the product reliability or product certification to be waived.
So that's a really interesting one for me, because it means that you've got to record against that individual AOV how that's expected to be used. So you might have two identical AOVs, but one of them, because of the use case, is going to be used more frequently.
Yes. So it's individual asset relevant.
That's really interesting. So from a maintenance perspective, that's
Is that covered, Will, in our list, or do you need to add it?
I'll add some notes now.
Yeah, because I think possibly, even if it's in there, it's not to that kind of level of granularity, is it?
Granularity.
Suzanne, I'm not going to call you because I know you've got issues with your mic. If you do want to speak though, just say so. Edward?
Just one thought. It's on the 1.5 square meters. I think we need to be clear that's geometric area, clear area. And if you're having a proper system designed, you might have aerodynamic free area. Maybe you need to distinguish between the two in there, because if you do have a proper system, that might be something you want to know.
Mm-hmm. Again, that's one of the tables I'd included was the smoke control, an extract from the Smoke Control Association guide, which tries to explain exactly that point you raised, Edward, because approved document B has got a 1.5 free area, which is just a hole in the wall, height by width. How does that isn't recognised by the 12101 Part 2 product standard? Therefore, that table kind of says, well, 1.5 is equivalent to 0.9 square meters of aerodynamic free area. That's what we tried to do as a trade organisation in that table I included.
Wendy, I know you had some issues around that, didn't you? Do you want to say something?
Sorry, with what? I missed
free
that
area.
The actual free area, the fact that it isn't actually defined specifically within the, is it document B? Yeah, that was it, because it states a minimum rather than saying, it's got to be 1.5 or any specific aerodynamic free area. It just specifies the minimum, which is 0.
So it's about the lack of precision then?
Yeah, again, it's lack of detail. It's very generic. It's not actually putting it into a usable context. Saying something can be 0 doesn't actually give any scope, does it? Sure. It's just like, well, it doesn't need to open then.
Yeah, so that chimes in with what you guys are saying. Do you think we've got that covered within our notes?
I didn't really understand that. If the minimum is 1.5 meters, the minimum can't be 0, can it?
No, in the actual document itself, it states a minimum. It doesn't actually say any number.
Okay. All right.
So people make the assumption that minimum's 0. Does that make sense?
Well, it says 1.5 square meters, the minimum.
I'm just trying to find the other document that I had out yesterday.
Okay.
I've got.
I'll
I mean, sadly,
get
I have
back to you.
copy of
I'll make a
ADB
note and
sitting
get back
next
to you.
me.
Yeah, do that. Yeah, do that on the chat.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Steve, anything that comes to your mind that we haven't covered?
No, I'm kind of looking at this more from from what is gathered as also endorsing this on a fire risk assessment basis, that these things are not being communicated to fire risk assessors always, and you really have to dig deep for this sort of information. And also, it should be part of, you know, the compliance side of things. If that's not been checked, you know, it is a risk, and it needs adding in there. And it's kind of coming. I know you guys are looking at the design side of it, but the continuation of that afterwards. I would think there are fire risk assessors out there at the moment that wouldn't know how to check one of these, or where to find the information of what that should, how that should be compliant. But as I say, I'm coming at it from a slightly different.
Sure. Yeah, we're certainly not just looking at the design perspective. Believe me, we certainly want to be including ongoing maintenance.
I know fire risk assessors that would not know where to gather that information from, and I know a lot of landlords that have taken over buildings that wouldn't know where that information is, or even if they had AOVs fitted. So,
George, should that be in number question 1? What Steve's saying, should that be put down as a risk?
Yeah, I think there's a risk. Well, there's. No, I think it's the information.
It's still the information. It's a very important point, isn't it?
It's a very important point, and I think it's absolutely fundamental. And since Will raised this or explained to me about the free area a while ago, I've been asking people, where is that recorded in the O&M? For me, it never is, and it actually, if I could just build on that, because that's one of the things I think that we need to sort out.
Could I just ask Steve? Steve, could you pop that your point into the chat for me so that I just can load it up?
Yeah, will do.
Thank you very much. Sorry, George.
Yeah. So one of the things is that if we look at a declaration of performance, here I've got one, again, it was one that I prepared for the fire door example, but this is from Assa Abloy, big manufacturer, and what we've got here is their declaration of performance and these presumably are important attributes that we ought to be capturing and presumably therefore checking from a maintenance point of view. You know, if they're required, then presumably you need to know this. But if you've got something like closing torque or opening torque, all we've got here is to say it's a pass or a fail. So that's basically saying that this door could be used under all these circumstances. And what it's also doing here, this is the performance specification to say that for this size of door, you need this type of door closer. Now, my view is that if you give an FM manager this information so that is intended to inform them of what the door closer to buy as a replacement, I think they'd be lost, because they'd have to measure the door thickness, they'd have to weigh the door leaf. How do you go about doing that? So it seems to me to make a lot more sense that you actually give them a specific set of information to say this was the door that was installed, that particular instance was installed, and this was the door closer that was used. So as a manufacturer and also the person that's commissioned it, it's a combination of the two, I suppose, isn't it? Well, it's product, and then installing it in a particular context, and then saying, right, in this context, this was the product that was used, this was how it was set up. Presumably, you can set how far it opens. Can you set an actuator so it only opens certain identical?
Absolutely.
So George, are you saying that what the information you're saying we need is that on our list of answers?
Yes, I think so. I'll make sure that it is.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thank you. Just can you put number 2 up again? Okay. Does anybody else have anything glaringly missing from question 2?
I've got a question to raise just on Will's table. Could you go down to the table?
The table, just it's in black. It's in black.
That one there, right?
There. Can you zoom, Jess?
Yeah, I don't know how far we can zoom in on it, but I've got a question, Will.
It's not. It's the SCA's table. It's not my table.
No, sure. Maybe it's not that one. What I was looking at one, which basically it looked as that seems all to be about the roof. So if you've got a window, would a window on an elevation?
If you go halfway along the table, it says vertical, and then brackets note 2, and the head at the top. That's a vertical AOV.
Pitch. Yes, that's correct. That's right.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Cheers, Will. Okay, so anybody have anything that they think is glaringly missing from question 2? I'll take that as a no. Are we happy?
Sorry.
Sorry, who is it? Pauline?
It's Pauline, yeah.
Don't apologise, Pauline.
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. Sorry, if you put your hand up, I apologise. I didn't see it.
That's okay. Probably just a couple of other things that we would probably like to know would be what floors the AOV covers, and also probably if it was either a retrofit or an upgrade AOV, and the date of that retrofitting or upgrade. So they're just a couple of other bits of information.
No, a couple of important points. Would you do me a favour and type them in?
Oh yeah, sure.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Are we done? Anybody else? Okay, we're going to say cut and print that just there, and we'll move down to question 3 and George's intro.
This is on the yes. Okay.
Yeah, tasks, methodology stuff.
Now, we recognise that we want to make sure that everybody that's doing work is competent and is adequately trained. But it's become clear from drilling down into the detail of these that you've got 2 levels, probably 3 levels of training. You've got industry training, and the example given yesterday was on cavity barriers. There's several different organisations do very high quality training on cavity barriers, but the individual manufacturers, they've also got product specific training that needs to be carried out, and therefore what I think we need to be doing is making sure that we're not entirely reliant just on whether somebody's got a certificate or not. We need to also be able to see that they need a checklist. The other point about that is that in the M&E market, which I'm very familiar with, over the last sort of 20 years, they've come to realise just having an experienced and qualified air conditioning engineer is not adequate to make sure that they can be confident that the work has been carried out properly, because of the range of different things that they've got to do, and also the new activities that come in. So what they've done is created a means to manage that, and I'll just show you an example of that. This is SFG 20. Just need to pull it up. So this is the basically the building services industry, and they've included now things that maintenance people have to do, like fire doors. So it's not just M&E, but you've got here the competency of the person carrying out the work, how long it's going to take to carry out the work, obviously all the procedures and things that they need to check. But the most important thing is that you've got a very clear list of tasks that have to be carried out against the door leaf, the frame, and all the other elements. Now, if it's the case that Will, for example, on his products, he's got a series of tasks that would make his product be installed properly. What we agreed yesterday, it would be a reasonable thing to ask that the manufacturers who have got that knowledge provide that information. Siderise said that some manufacturers see this as an earning opportunity, and they obviously sell courses, which is great, but that shouldn't be the only way for people to access that specialist information. And therefore, what we're going to be recommending is that manufacturers will provide the information in a form that could be put into checklists, for example. So that's really the point about. So what tasks? So that's my question about this. I'd like to end up with a series of method statements or tasks that we might be able to use to inform that type of data set.
Okay, so if you'd like to take a couple of minutes and just flick through, just as put that on the chat, have a flick through as to where we are currently, and then we can look at how we can augment that listing. Just to answer Suzanne's question for everyone, we're looking at having outputs for each of these meetings with the full written up questions and answers within the next probably 10 days. And you'll obviously all receive a copy of that.
And hopefully you've got access now. What I've been doing is sending out to everybody what each person's been contributing anyway.
Yeah.
And when Steve does a bit of work, then we're going to put his out as well.
We're going to send it with the Christmas cards.
Yeah, the manufacturer's information, I think, should be relatively straightforward to ask for, shouldn't it, Will? The real challenge is, how do we distill your knowledge, Pauline, of what you would, is there a method by which you would expect people to, you would follow, or you'd expect them to follow a checklist that you might ask them to do to make sure that they've considered things properly? With an AOV, what are the things based on your experience that if you were doing the installation or the inspection, what are the things that, or maintenance, what are the things that you'd look for? I don't think we've got that knowledge yet.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure if you can hear me because my thing's looking as if it's mute. But we would be looking for a checklist, to use a checklist of some description to capture, to ensure that we capture the information that we need. And to.
Have you got any checklists for doing, for example, inspections of AOVs?
Yeah, I think we probably have. I haven't got one to hand. But...
No, that's great. How about Clarion?
No, I don't think we have. I think it's a checklist that would be within part of other checklists. So it'll be like the housing checklist, monthly, weekly check form saying is the AOV openable and or is it free of obstruction or so forth. It would just ask very basic questions, and then in terms of the other checks, it more detail would go into that. But I don't think we've got a specific just for AOVs.
Will, have you got something on that?
Yeah, just to pick up on that, we have to be careful about throwing it under the umbrella maintenance, because what we're talking about is regular and very important observational checking. Now, that's an element of the overall way of making sure that the system operates when it needs to, and the level of skill required to do that is not the same as, for instance, a qualified electrician. So there's the regular observational checking, which is kind of what Suzanne just talked about. But then, even for an ADB compliant system, that system needs to be checked against the cause and effect, and even more so if you're into a mechanical extract system, to measure your extract rates on a mechanical system, or even to validate the amount of free air opened via the essential characteristics, via the declaration of performance. And that has to then move across to probably question 4, which is stepping into competence. So I think there's an important distinction, but the point you're making, George, about the need for manufacturers to provide that observational checklist, I think is a brilliant point, and it's something I've actually taken a note of, because I think that's important.
We do keep coming back to manufacturers, don't we? We found that.
Well, we are talking about products, aren't we? But
oh no, absolutely. But in terms of requirements that aren't fulfilled.
Well, yeah,
I'm joking, Will.
All right, it's good.
No, I think it was, I don't know if it was Will or it might have been James Carpenter for L&Q said to me that one of the problems is that with something like an AOV, the AOV is controlled by the fire panel, say, and I think it might have been Edward said something earlier about there might be a specialist panel for an AOV. Is that right, Edward? Did you mention that?
I did touch on that, maybe not in quite that way, and I'm sure other people have as well.
Yeah, I noticed it in somebody's notes. I apologise if I picked the wrong person. I've read a lot of these things, but what I think was the point that was made was that it might be that somebody will replace the fire panel who's a qualified electrician, and it might even be a qualified electrician that understands how a fire panel works. But what they may not have known is how the software was set up to deal with the smoke side as well. Was it you that said that to me, Will? It might have been.
I don't think it was in this instance, but the point is absolutely right. I mean, fire alarm systems have specialist software. Most smoke control systems have specialist software, and that's where you're getting to level of expert. Effectively, it's the same as most things. You move into expert user level, and I know Pauline touched on open and close protocol earlier, and it's important that any organization can go in and maintain a fire alarm, but to make changes, that organization has to have access to the necessary software. It's common in all fire alarm technologies. But part of accessing that software is you have to be competent to know what you're doing, because and there's got to be an audit trail of the changes that are being made, because you might, if you're not knowing what you're doing, you reconfigure a fire alarm system and it makes it more dangerous. So it's very much the next point, which is competence. But it's understanding the interactions as well. Well, I guess in summary, it comes down to the individuals being competent at quite a high level.
Have we covered that, Will, do you think, in our answers?
I've just written it in.
Oh, okay, cool. Edward, you had your hand up and then put it down.
Well, it was just on that subject of protocol. And
okay.
Will covered it, so I was just
okay. That's cool.
Head.
All right, let me just ask if there's anything glaring that anybody sees we're missing on question 3. Suzanne, I know will have written it in if she has. Pauline?
No, I don't think there's anything else I can think of.
Keith?
No, I think we covered it.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah. I've just got a question to ask. One of the things I've heard many times is protocols and closed protocols. Are fire alarm systems accessible to anybody that needs to have that access, or are they closed to somebody like Chubb?
Yeah, it's a really good point actually, and something we should probably cover. In that, yes, if they end up installing a fire alarm panel on an AOV system, on just a smoke system, but it's closed protocol, you won't be able. Not everyone will be able to access it and maintain it. And I do think even with the AOV panels, where you can have panels, they do also have closed and open protocols.
It's a two-edged sword, isn't it? On the one hand, closed protocols are pain commercially as an operator because you're tied into, say, Gent or whoever it might be. But on the other hand, it does protect against poorly trained people tinkering with the system. So there's two sides to it, and we have to then choose what is the greater evil, really. Mm-hmm. But it's probably the main thing is that there's something in there that records what is the protocol, who can, and what level you can work up to. Because a lot of systems you can do your normal checks and verify it's working, but you can't make changes to the system. You want to add a device, or you want to connect to a lift or whatever else, and that's maybe where you need more expertise, and it might be good to push it to a specialist.
100% agree with you there, Edward, and it's replacing simple devices is normally you wouldn't even need software. It's dip switches and on the back of the MCP, and that's one in, one out, and you don't even need the software. As systems get more complex, especially when you're talking mechanical systems where you've got quite an involved cause and effect, well, actually, it's really quite dangerous to let somebody who's not really fully understanding of that to make changes, because you could lose your compartmentation straight away on case of an activation, and it's so important that it comes back. So to me, open and closed protocol is kind of almost a misnomer. It's just making sure whoever has access to make those changes is competent, because I don't believe there are any organisation, manufacturers, we being one of them, we have to have software-based systems because of that's how we manage to cover the complexity of the system, and that software is available to whoever wants it as long as we can train them to do it, because it will be irresponsible for us to go, yeah, there you go, fill your boots. It would be dangerous.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, in defence, you get lumped in with other sectors where they use closed protocol
Oh, really?
in a different way. I didn't say this, but lifts, for instance, where the lifts will be sold to you at cost, basically, but then they make it back on the maintenance.
Okay.
It's quite clear on that. I don't think the smoke control industry is guilty of that. In my opinion, others might say it different, but.
Okay, so in terms of our question, our answers to question 3, anybody now have any further glaring omissions?
Could I just understand what I don't know if the person that wrote that, the maintenance information in accordance with the British standard there, could somebody, I'm not asking for a free copy of it, but whoever has written that, does anybody have access to it so that they can just show me what it is? I don't mean now, but if somebody could show me what BS 7346-8 actually contains, that would be really helpful. Have you got?
Yeah, we'll say yes.
We'll definitely have it.
Excellent. So that being the case, are we ready to close off question 3? Any naysayers? Nope. Just you know what to do. So scan down to question 4, which George will introduce. Competency. Obviously, we've covered some of this already. It kind of runs through into it, but we're going to be a bit more focused.
Yeah. Well, the point about this, I think I've covered before, and that is that it's a given that we want UCAS accreditation and competency for people that are. So we need to be supporting that activity, but it's become very clear that in itself is not the silver bullet. The direct works group that I mentioned there, that is made up of apparently 120 or 140 housing associations. I don't know if you're aware of them, but it's they're sort of coordinating organisations that have got their own DLOs, and they're involved with a new standard that's being created with UCAS for competency. And they tell me that quite a few housing associations are now signing up to that, so that people that are doing maintenance on their buildings are going to have to demonstrate that they are compliant with this. And one of the reasons they said that this is so necessary is that they did a review a couple of years ago of people that believed or that said that they could fit fire doors, that were apparently competent in providing in fitting fire doors. They examined 550 people, and only 6 of them passed the assessment. So that is staggering, isn't it? And I think that therefore we need to work at 2 levels, which, I mean, to be honest, most of the answers that we've had here are consistent with this. That first of all, if, for example, you're procuring a service, you don't need, or you shouldn't need to go into the detail of how they're actually going to do everything. You ought to be able to access the method statements that they use. So it's that 2 levels really of being able to work at a competency level, but also to ensure that they, you know, the method by which. And the other thing is that it does appear to be that there doesn't appear to be a standard way that all of these different training organisations arrive at what their certification is. I would argue that probably needs to be more consistent. Maybe you,
Steve, you've got your hand up, which is great to see.
I think we could have a whole week's meeting on competency, to be honest. And you made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when you said about UCAS accreditation there, George, that unfortunately in most instances UCAS accreditation is down to the company and not down to the people actually undertaking the work. And there needs to be a scheme where the people are evaluated on their competency, it's very difficult to prove it. And it's something that we're looking at with our software, where if you were doing a fire risk assessment, you have to highlight your competencies. So people will not be competent in doing AOVs. They may be competent in doing fire doors and fire risk assessments. So they wouldn't tick that box. Therefore, if they said that they're competent in inspecting fire doors or fire extinguishers, then they are challenged on that on a not probably on a daily basis, but certainly on a weekly basis, that certain questions will be asked of them to measure their competency. And it's something I see all the time we've just had it with a hospital where we've put they're using our software to do their fire doors. For the last 3 years, they've been inspecting 2,500 fire doors. They actually only had 700 doors that were acting as fire doors. So the competency of the person that had been checking that should have been flagged up way before that. But because it said fire door on it, the people checking it assumed that it was a fire door. And I think we really need to nail the on-the-ground competency of the people undertaking, these checks and balances, and not only the companies undertaking them. Sorry,
yeah, we had this raised with cavity barriers. Somebody walks onto site, they've got a little certificate saying they're certified for cavity barriers, but they've been trained in a specific cavity barrier, which it doesn't identify on the little card. They come onto site to fit a totally different cavity barrier that they have absolutely no experience whatsoever, but it says that they're certified, so legally they can do it.
Cladding was a prime example after Grenville, where we were phoned on a number of occasions asking to do cladding surveys, and quite rightly we said we're not competent to undertake cladding surveys. I know companies that are less qualified than us that undertook cladding surveys, and it's this has really got to be nailed. It's got to stop being a tick in the box exercise, and it's got to be valued information that is being collected. And that's an onerous task to get everybody up to a level of competency, but it certainly needs defining in my eyes.
Keith, have you got any thoughts on that?
Apologies, sorry, I'm just on the phone to my director.
Oh, no worries, sorry, no problem.
I'll be back in with you in a second.
No, sure.
No problem. Will, I'm sure you've got some thoughts.
You're on mute, Will.
Yeah, absolutely. It was only probably two and a half years ago, 3 years ago, the smoke control industry had no competence scheme whatsoever. And post Hackett, we had to do something about it. Hence, we approached IFC. We put the SDI 19 scheme in place. Now it's mandatory for any SCA member. They must be IFC accredited, and in the last 12 months, that scheme has been underwritten by UCAS. But as Steve rightly says, that's only the first step, because that's at an organisation level. What the SCA is doing now is starting to create individual training modules, so we can go down to an individual user. So it's and the message is it doesn't stop. It's got to go down. I guess the whole experience is it goes wrong at a granular level. So we've got to break everything down to granular levels for people, for products, etc. And it's only once they're achievable and measurable will we start to see significant improvement.
And training never ends, does it? It's ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to our questions. Again, the usual question from me. Anything glaring missing that anybody can come up with?
So in terms of competency, Will, what is the body that would be, are there several organizations that would be providing what you would consider to be a good competency assessment? There's obviously the Smoke Control Association. Is there anybody else?
For AOVs and smoke control?
Yes.
No.
Okay, good.
No.
That's the right answer.
And before that, there was nobody. So yeah, it's the industry weren't stepping up to the plate by a long way, and it was recognised. So, and I stress, so we did something about it, but I stress it's the first step. It's far from anywhere near where it needs to be.
I just wanted to ask a question. So, if for example, people are fitting if they're fitting windows, do you take one of the, because you presumably want the windows to look the same, would you take a window of the style that's being used and then turn it into an AOV, or would you always create a bespoke AOV?
Two-way. Ultimately, it comes down to the product certification. It's got to function when it's required to do so. So, in answer to your question, George, what you would do is, if you wanted to use a window that matches the rest of the window, you go to a company who could provide the certification for their actuator on that specific window and provide a declaration of performance. That's what we do. We don't manufacture AOVs. We work with those window companies. I think we've got 67 window profiles tested to satisfy that. The alternative route is you go and buy a whole product, which is typically the roof lights would be the roof light and the actuator all together tested as one unit. So both directions are achievable. The essence is the product certification evidence through the declaration of performance.
Understood. Okay. And in terms of fitting it, would the person that's fitting all the other windows, is it practical, is it likely that that particular contractor is also going to fit the AOV, or would it always be somebody certified that does it?
Somebody certified has to check it at the end.
Got it. Okay. So therefore, the method statement of actually doing it, and the records of maybe photographs of it being installed and things like that. I mean, we're doing a project at the moment for Oxford, one of the Oxford colleges, where they're installing new windows and they're taking photographs of the installation process so that they can then evidence what they've done. So I imagine that that's the sort of methodology. But what you're saying is the certified person could then come in and just,
check it.
Okay, so back to the questions. Sorry, but there we go. I'm gonna, unless anybody's got anything they want to add on the questions and answers, we'll move down. Is everybody happy with the answers to this question? I can't remember what number it is actually.
This is
4, is it? This is 4. Is
One.
question 4 complete and ready to print? Any naysayers on that?
No.
No. We're all happy. We're all happy. Excellent. Just down to number 5 and George.
Okay. So change management is accepted and recognised as being one of the big breaks to the golden thread. And there's 2 elements to this. There's obviously on new build where somebody might pick Will's product because of its performance. So the designer will maybe specify or recommend it. There's a reluctance in many cases for a designer to actually specify something because of both commercial and liability reasons. But let's say, I mean, hopefully we can overcome that. But that's where we're at the moment. But then the contractor comes along and says, well, I can do something, get something that looks very much like and SE controls AOV and swap it out for something else. Now, in construction, at least there's a methodology by which that's done through the change management and oh God, I've lost it. Technical submittal process. But the important thing about the technical submittal process that we need to make more rigorous is that the designer needs at least to start by saying what product it is that they were going to use. Because unless we can go from what was being intended, that the specification was supporting, to what was actually being used, then we don't have a proper change management process. So we're pushing for that in the construction side of things, which I think we're getting good buy-in, because frankly, that's the way it always used to be done. And we've lost the habit of that. But what we said yesterday, and I see Susanna and Edward, I think, agreed with this yesterday, we ought to be adopting that same methodology in existing buildings. So although it's not as easy, we ought to be able to record what door closer was actually being used, what door closer are we replacing with what new door closer, and then making sure that we've got a proper handover process between the two. So that's where I think we can do with that. And obviously the specification, the performance specification of that particular product in that circumstance, that comes back to the point I was making earlier. We need to make sure that the specification for that needs to be instance specific or individual asset specific, not just for a type of product. That's me.
Pauline,
Yeah.
I'm going to come to you first.
Okay.
Because you're off my screen for some reason. You're kind of in the corner, and I don't want to forget you.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think similar to what we were saying yesterday about the cavity barriers, I'm kind of at the end of the chain in terms of receiving handover of properties from development. And so we very rarely get notified of any change that's, well, we don't really know what's been proposed initially. We're really not party to that. And if it's then changed out, we're then not party to that information either. But being at the end of the chain and having to manage the properties going forward, we're the recipients of any issues that arise as a result of changes that we weren't aware of. So although we don't have anything in place for that, it is important that we do, and that we should introduce something going forward whereby we are notified of any changes and from what was originally proposed, and the implications of what any of those changes may have in terms of the managing and maintenance of the property.
Otherwise, you're managing and maintaining something you don't know what you've got.
No, that's exactly it. And if issues arise, we don't always know what we're looking at initially, and you end up having to, you know, either get people out to start undoing and taking things apart to find out what we've actually got, and you know, and a lot of backtracking to find out what should have been or what was originally proposed, and who authorised the change and why that change was made. So it's all that kind of information that we don't really have party to that we should.
I can imagine if you kind of like going backwards in examining these things, you can get into a situation where you're actually compromising the integrity of what you're checking.
Yeah, well, definitely. If we don't really know what we're checking or what it should have been, what the original intention was, or what was originally proposed, then we're not really. It's like working in the dark to try and find out where we are, and you know, what we then need to do to put things right.
I think that's really good. But would that be covered by answers we've already got, Pauline?
I'll let you read that, Pauline. I've got a comment to make on this, Andrew. Sorry, Richard. Yeah. So The I've got a question actually, so rather than a comment. As a building safety manager, if you're not getting adequate information about what you're taking on responsibility for and also liability for, how much opportunity have you got to refuse?
At the moment, this is something coming. I'm part of an emerging team where these are the things that are now being put forward and that we are now tightening up and trying to introduce those stop points where we do have the opportunity to be made aware or to question if there have been things that have been changed, and have the right to refuse if we know and understand what the implications of the changes are. So we're not there yet, but we know that it's something that we need to be working towards.
Sorry, I've not given you time to read this, have I? I've just jumped straight in. I apologise. Do you all want to take a couple of minutes and just flick through this? Sorry.
Okay.
I don't know who wrote that, but that's very good. I think the gateways answer the question to some extent, don't they? As long as they are rigorously managed. I'm just a bit concerned, knowing the way construction projects work, that the asset team are not given adequate time or authority to actually object, and they become under business pressure to sign things off. And I think under normal circumstances, that's not very good. But if you could incur a jail sentence, for example, because you've taken over a legal responsibility for something, I would think you'd really want to know that you've got the right information.
Right, should we just check? Have you all had time to read that through all this now? Yeah?
I think we need to scroll down a bit, Richard.
Sorry?
We need to scroll down a bit. There's some stuff below.
Yeah, it's on the chat, George.
Oh, is it? Sorry, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, we put it on the chat for everybody to read. Just give me another minute, just in case you missed anything.
You know, I picked this up earlier, actually. It says a schedule of safety critical elements should be in place for the building. I think that might have been you that wrote that, Edward, was it?
Yeah, I'm guilty.
No.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, do you have such a schedule?
Well, this is something that we're looking at our sort of design brief now, or have been, and one of the things we've put in there is you define what your safety critical items are, and once they're specified, they're effectively locked in. Okay, there might be circumstances where something has to change, it's inevitable, you can't get something, but then it has to go through a proper process of being checked by all the right people, not just a decision made at the QS by the QS, for instance, say, oh, we'll just get another one of these and then fire it off to site. Actually, has the original designer had sight of it? Do the people actually know what this component does? Have had sight of that change and then been able to comment on it? And also the client, because sometimes a change could affect the way you manage a building. I mean, on smoke control, something that comes at us quite a lot is about control equipment, and we often want something that will actuate lifts, door releases, and if you don't get the right kind of control system, you can't do that. And I've had quite a few at the last minute that say, oh, can you just sign this disclaimer? And the answer is no, because I'm not going to sign off because I had a control system that's been put in under a different standard of 5839. because it was cheaper, without being involved in the decision in the first place. So that usually.
Okay, Pauline,
that
sorry,
helps
can I just go
behaviour
back to
in the long
you?
term.
If now you've actually had time to read that, if your point is not covered, would you type it in the chat for me?
I covered it in a previous question, actually.
You've covered it. That's fine then, Chris. That's fine then, Edward. Sorry.
But I thought it was worth mentioning.
No, that's absolutely fine.
I suspect that comes about because when the main contractor gives out works packages, they don't convey all the information to the specialist contractors. So if Will's team doesn't get told, oh, by the way, this system needs to open the doors and ground the lifts, they're going to put in an ISO-based system rather than a BS5839. And it's all too late by the time it's been installed.
100%.
Yeah, and I was actually talking about Pauline's point about, you know, at the end of all the process, she takes over a building and she's got no information. She doesn't know what's in there.
Yeah, so I don't think it's specifically covered, although the gateway part of the question, that is something that we
could you highlight that for me then? Put it in, obviously, in your own words, and because it's obviously a very important point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think there's also something that's quite interesting here as well, that I agree fully that people changing things within that it should be at the specification design. But we came across this recently where somebody had actually fitted a suspended ceiling below an AOV. Now that's really useful, but what had happened that wasn't actually in the design. It was the actual people that fitted the suspended ceiling and decided to continue it across for aesthetic purposes. They were not aware that an AOV had been fitted. The guys fitting the ceiling obviously probably didn't even know what an AOV was. And I think it's that as well, that what else is going to impact on equipment that people are putting in. It may not be that you're changing the equipment, it's the fact that you're putting something into that building, or like that suspended ceiling, that completely nullifies the fire compartmentalisation, and it all has to be pulled together. And we see it on a regular basis, where certainly on refurbishments as well, where great on the build, it's probably being signed off at some stage, but it doesn't take long for a building to be refurbished. And what is the impact of what they are doing on there? So it's not just changing specifications, it's on equipment, it's also changing specifications for the building. Don't ask me to type that up, please.
Oh, please.
I'll see what I can do.
You're a gem.
Edward, just on what you've just been saying there, if you are doing that at the moment, it'd be good to talk to your people that are doing it, because this is what we're doing with the Housing Association Data Group. This is a list of 132 asset types that have been collected from all the different housing associations, largely from their maintenance systems. And what we're trying to do is put together data templates for each of these things. And they picked out 16 originally asset types that were relevant to fire, right? And when I gave this to I gave this to Siderise, they said you can start cavity barriers. And of course, the penny then dropped is because this list here is only things that they're doing regular maintenance on or inspections. And if they're not inspecting cavity barriers, it doesn't go on there. There's also some emissions here. So, for example, smoke detectors. They've got heat detectors, but not smoke detectors. So that's,
and it's all component driven rather than system driven.
No, there are systems as well.
All right, okay, fair enough.
You see there, we've got
smoke extra. I was just thinking fire alarm systems, because I don't know, in my mind of being sort of organising things, I want to see system and then components of that system in organised in that way. Were things like dry risers, wet risers, hydrants, and all that kind of stuff in there?
They aren't, no, and clearly they need to be, but they're not there because people aren't. I say that. I don't think they are. I don't mind sharing this with you, by the way. Oh, there's a dry riser cabinet. Oh yeah, there is a dry riser.
Dry risers there, yeah.
Yeah. So what would actually be useful? We've got this in our asset information requirements tool, so we can add against this all the different attribute information that's needed against each of these items. So it might be worth us just having a separate session, Edward, just to see if you guys are doing this. I know other people that are doing it as well. We might be able to.
Yeah, there's probably a few of us in Clarion that would be happy to help out on that. It's a subject close to our hearts, is capturing all the right information in the right way.
Yeah.
And ensuring that things are maintained.
I concur with that. And actually something we've just discovered is private fire hydrants, which are, fire hydrants that don't often get, supposed to be serviced once a year, aren't picked up by the brigade. And that's something we're talking about at the moment, about trying to make sure our asset list and that is correct.
Can we just go back to the question, and then if we can nail that, then we'll have some time at the end for more general focused discussion. How's that?
Sorry, Richard.
Yes.
No, it's
do you want to just put the question up? Sorry?
That was pointed at me, don't worry.
Okay, so any glaring omissions from the answers to question 5? Am I going to take that as a no, we're happy with it? Or Suzanne's nodding, Will's smiling, Edward's pensive. I'm going to take that as a yes. Going once. No, I knew George was going to come in just when I was ready to close it off.
I just want to ask a question. Has anybody got any interesting stories about when one product was swapped for another and what the impact of that was? Because people like stories.
Ed, you've got a good story about that.
Were you putting me in it, Suzanne?
I am putting you in, yes.
Which interesting story?
Where we replaced the balcony products on the balcony.
Oh, there's whole stuff around. Well, in terms of installation products and yeah. I mean, there's a multitude of things that. I mean, we've had things with balconies where, well, it's actually more like decks where installation products, the wrong ones put in there. So for instance, polystyrene, which the industry will say you need to encapsulate. You put polystyrene with a timber deck over the top, you create a situation where it's very easy to start quite a substantial fire. And then what you find is products around it which would normally pass fire tests don't, because of the size of the fire that it's exposed to. So for instance, EWI systems with polystyrene in them, they've got a nice render on them, which in the normal fire test in the lab will pass with a small flame. But you put a 2 megawatt fire next to it, it's going to fail. It just melts, vaporizes, goes through the render and it burns. So yeah, there's all kinds of things. I mean, on the point of certification, the other one is bodies that pose as certification bodies, but are merely just training organizations that masquerade as certification bodies. So there is one out there in the fire stopping world that you need to be aware of, called NatFIS. You can do some training with them, and then you can go and self-certify your work. So that's something we need, genuine bona fide certification, both of companies and of people's training.
Well, there needs to be some kind of comeback on those kind of operations, doesn't there?
It's a bit of a wild west out there. I mean, after all, what do you need to become a fire stopping installer? A bread knife, mastic gun, and a white van. to be quite blunt. And that's probably the same, you know, actually, what's stopping you becoming a fire risk assessor?
Well, yeah, absolutely nothing.
Other than your sanity.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's probably, there just needs to be, although I'm not, you know, I don't want to, you know, you don't want to see regulation to death on everything. There are areas where you think actually we do need to set a certain bar.
It's got to be done centrally, hasn't it? It's got to be regulatory.
Yeah, we just have to be careful where we throw that.
Then you open the can of worms, don't you? That's the problem.
Well, the big problem is that if you make it too rigorous, then nobody can do the work, so therefore nobody gets inspected.
So nothing happens. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's also, I think, we're back to competency again. And a real good example of that is asbestos. You can take somebody off the street, put them on a week B402 course, they're now a qualified asbestos surveyor. Don't have any knowledge of buildings, anything else, and they are a qualified, and they can go and work for a UCAS accredited surveying company as an asbestos surveyor. And it's pretty similar in fire, where you can go and do a 4-day NEBOSH course. Apparently, you are now qualified fire risk assessor with no knowledge other than what you've gained in the last week. So it needs something doing in there to, as I say, the people on the ground more than anything.
Yeah, it's one of those things. We can have all the best standards, but if you actually haven't got the people that are competent enough to understand them and apply them, we're finished.
Okay, I'm going to call question 5 closed. I've got a feeling George will have something to say in an adjacent subject.
Well, yeah, I think I've already done it in terms of recruiting people to help Will and me on the AOV front. And the other question I've got, maybe this is something that we draw out from our discussion afterwards, Edward, and that is at the moment we're doing fire doors, AOVs, and cavity barriers, because they're 3 things that, you know, I've been told are critical. But I'm sure that sprinkler systems and all these different types of things, I don't know, are you guys finding this useful? You know, I'm getting the impression that people are finding it, the collection of experienced people around this table is, I think, stunning. And I think what we're also doing is we're learning from the people that know about fire doors but don't know about AOVs, and vice versa. You know, so I think the spread of knowledge is second to none. So I think you know, if we can get a little bit more input, because actually spending 10 or 15 minutes looking at something and saying, right, I know because of my experience, this is something. Yeah, Suzanne.
I think, and I thank you, and I agree with all of that. And I think it's important to keep the group smallish, but have a broad range of people, because if you get sort of too many people, if you get more than 10 or 15, then people don't talk and just people are sort of coming and not contributing. Yeah. But what you want is actually people who've got, you know, good experience and different experience and able to bring the different dimensions. I agree. I think doing the homework beforehand was really useful, and I think that was really good because it focused everybody's minds and kept it specific. I think keeping it to a sort of 2-hour workshop is good. I think, and I think it's good for us to be driving this and influencing this, and it's coming from industry. It's exactly what Dame Judith Hackett wanted. She wanted us to lead on it, didn't she? The industry together, to come together to do this, and to drive it forward. And rather than have, as is what's in some instances, the regulator or the government telling us, you know, this is what they're going to do, and then that's not feasible or possible. Surely it's better that we say what is possible, what's viable, what's practical, what's good, and drive it that way. So I completely agree, and I think we should do some more of these around some other, because the sprinklers and firefighting equipment.
We're looking at doing that, Suzanne. Very much so. And we've been very happy with the way this, well, more than happy with the way this has been going, and we're going to continue.
The other thing that you should be aware, Suzanne, is that what we're doing, for the reasons that you just said there, you don't want too many people on these. We've actually split them so that we've got another 3 sessions, one on fibrils, AOVs, and cavity barriers coming up over the next month. So if there's anybody that you know within Clarion or elsewhere that you think could contribute, then let us know. I mean, I think we're fairly stacked, but
I think we are quite stacked actually. But to be honest, George, I think we're fine for now. If there are people that to come on board and do stuff, let's move. As Suzanne said, we're going to be doing other products, aren't we?
Yeah, but they could still fill in that. It might be people that are still could do the homework and feed into it without having to join the.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is get the collective input from everybody.
Absolutely.
I think unless we do this, it's not going to happen, and it will only become a risk transfer process. Finally, because we're all volunteers doing this, and I'm certainly spending a hell of a lot of time on it, as is Richard and Jis and Mwenzi. But I just feel it's so important that this is a one in a lifetime probably opportunity to get this right. So what I wondered is we've produced a little form that we'd like you to just fill in to say, give us a credit to say that it's that you found it useful, and a comment. I'm not talking about a long form, but just something saying that you've attended the session and say something nice about it, and also constructive criticism if you can think of any. Brilliant.
Okay, well, unless anybody's got anything pressing they want to add, we can actually finish early.
Just very quick question from myself, Richard. In terms of the development of that HADG data dictionary and the templates, is there an opportunity for me to arrange an hour discussion to sort of help us move that forward?
Absolutely.
Can I just share my screen a second to show you literally just a quick spreadsheet of what we've developed so far? Can you see that? Have you got that?
Not yet. Yep, got it now.
Okay, so the left-hand side is straight out of the template that you were showing earlier, George. Then we've got, oh God, I've lost it myself. Has it? Have you still got it?
Yep.
Yeah,
got it.
I haven't. So the green column is the asset. The blue column is information or assets that aren't covered currently. There's the industry asset name, which is what you tested against, and then the available product testing. So just so everybody's aware of that's what we're working on at the moment.
excellent.
And are you building into that I've been through BS 8644 to try and pick out any additional attributes that they're recommending, which I have to say they've not really understood how these things work, to be honest. But taking that to one side, they have come up with some resistance to fire and reaction to fire. They've modified those slightly to say reaction to fire required, which I don't really understand what they mean by that.
In answer to your question, yes, Leon and myself are looking to incorporate whatever information is needed. So yeah, it's rather than we will include. I don't know. We'll be led by as much by you guys as ourselves.
Is everybody aware of what we're talking about there? The new fire standard, the new British standard that's out for draft at the moment. It's it's got another 3 weeks for people's feedback. Are you aware of it? Do you want me to send it to you?
Please. There's so many at the moment. I want to be sure it's one I've looked at.
Yeah.
8644 Part 1.
Yeah.
Management of digital information.
It's fair to say that it's getting a bit of a kicking.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd be great to have. I think I have, but it'd be good to check all the same.
Yeah.
Well, just to be clear, you said about having an hour meeting.
Yeah, I think on the templater. That's
On the
what it says.
templater.
It's the next stage on from what we've just been talking about, Richard.
No. What I mean is, do we need to arrange that, or are you doing that, George?
It was just a general interest principle, Richard. I'll arrange something. It's just if anybody said no, then I wouldn't.
Oh right, okay, sorry. Yeah. I wasn't sure if I was supposed to do something.
I think the first step is probably for anybody that's in this group, maybe with Will actually thinking about it, to actually just understand all the asset types that we're dealing with within the Housing Association data group, so that we can actually, because part of the issue is that like cavity barriers is probably there. No, that one isn't actually, but AOVs. Yeah, AOVs were mentioned, but there's probably other asset types that are composites or assemblies that have not been considered because there's no specific maintenance of them. And that was the point that Will made earlier. We need to think of it not just as maintenance, but it's inspection as well. And life cycle replacement. Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks ever so much for your time. I found it very, very helpful.
Excellent.
So, job.
Cheers. Bye.
Thank
See
you.
you again.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Cheers.